Hi, welcome back. In this lesson, we'll be painting a landscape, and it'll be a forest scene with a stream going through it. I think it'll be interesting to switch our format. Instead of horizontal like we've been doing so far, let's turn our paper vertically and see what happens to our composition. We'll be using some glazing and some lifting techniques, and we'll really put them to use in creating that white water coming through the forest and creating some of that misty atmospheric darkness that we'll have in the trees. So just instinctively with our composition, I know that my forest is going to take up about 2/3 of the top part of this rectangle, and the stream and foreground will take up the bottom third. In a similar way, I want some light to be coming into this forest, and I'm going to have sort of a canyon of light, if you will, a column of light coming down, and I'll have it not dead center, but rather over here about 1/3 of the way from that right side. So let's make this demarcation between the forest and the stream be a soft edge. I'm going to have foliage down here, and the stream will be winding, and although it makes it look like I'm starting at dead center, I'm going to have it go off to one side just to kind of keep that asymmetrical look going. Remember the wedges that we've used for our foreground tricks? I'm creating sort of some wedge type shapes that help carve out this stream bed and kind of create that pathway, which it will be light. The water's going to be a light value in our painting, kind of working its way back into this dark forest. There will be trees in the back, so I'm going to have a lot of verticality back here. And in terms of the value, rather than have it all be the same, I want to have more light coming down through this area. I will still show trees, still have some trunks and some pine tree, kind of fir tree, Oregon-y, foresty stuff going on in the back here. But out to the sides, I'll be able to have some darker values. And so it'll help me create this look of having this mysterious kind of column of light descending down into this mysterious, beautiful, ethereal forest. Right down at this edge here, at the bottom, I want to have a lot of dark stuff meet my light foreground plants. So this part, that's going to really get socked in with quite a bit of dark pigment. Some of that will continue across here, and especially down in here where it comes up against that foreground stuff. Okay, and I'll try to make some shapes that are kind of dancing a little bit. It's kind of give a little bit of intrigue and rhythm. Down here, we're going to use some of our foreground tricks to get some plants growing, some vegetation growing, and to help tell people that this is a river, not just a highway. We're going to need to do some things that'll kind of show that. We will be putting in some little rocks, maybe some darker valued areas. We'll maybe put in some sort of almost flowing line work so that people will see that this is actually a river. And if I have some rocks, I might need to have some splashy sorts of white space in my painting where that river is splashing around. And then this value will have some darks in it. So it's a combination of darks and lights. But you can tell that there's going to be a pathway of light and sort of a pathway leading you into this painting. And there'll be a fairly sharp contrast between what is in the foreground and what's in the background. And we'll make that river really sing out a little bit. Okay, let's think about color for a second. I want to do my little test palette like I usually do. And I want that to reflect what we'll do here with the light, with the stream, and with this forest. I'm going to start with my lightest value. So I'm thinking about this light that's coming down into this mysterious cathedral kind of look. And I'm going to use medium yellow for that. I'll make a puddle of medium yellow, but with some clean water, I'm going to add some white. I'm using titanium white, and that's going to change this to a tint that's more pastel-y. And I think it'll make sort of a beautiful, mysterious kind of cathedral effect coming down through the woods. Next to that, blending with it, we'll start working with some greens. So we can have some olive green come, let's give you a little bit better view of how this blends. I've got some medium yellow mixed with titanium white. I've got some olive green mixed with that. Let that mix together a little bit. And as we get darker in our forest, we'll add maybe a little more sap green. We'll add some Prussian blue. We'll add some raw sienna. When you add those things, you're going to have a much darker green going on. Between those three, we should have a pretty beautiful combination. It's a pretty nice chunk of the spectrum right there. So we'll think about this yellow column and then lighter green down in some of the areas where the stream is beginning, and then the dark depths of that forest. Okay, I think we're ready to go. I don't feel like I even need guidelines with pencil at all on this painting. I'm thinking of my column of light coming down about a third of the way from the right-hand side. I'm thinking of my stream coming down here, and I'm going to carve that out of whatever happens with the paint. So I will start with some clean water, and I'm just going to paint the whole surface with that clean water. Use a big brush, go fast, and go across. So we've got completely soaked paper. This is cold pressed paper that's been stretched, and it should be able to handle quite a good water load. It'll retain that water for as long as I want to work with it that way. I'm going to wipe up the edge of my tape with a paper towel to just not have any accidental blowback from that water that's pooled over by the edge. Okay, let's start with our lighter value, and I'm going to start with that mixture of medium yellow and titanium white and get that nice, rich, kind of earthy yellow color. Wouldn't hurt to throw a little yellow ochre into it in a minute here. And that's where my column is of light invading the forest is going to be. Now, rather than just paint that one stretch, I'm actually going to let that extend to the sides because I want to have a natural, beautiful kind of flowing integration or transition from where the light is coming down in to where the trees get started. Okay, and then start a new puddle with some olive green mixed with a little bit of raw sienna. Olive green and raw sienna makes a green that I think is what I notice a lot in Colorado. So it's fairly arid, and it's not just a green that you'll get in a tube anywhere. And I'm going to move my green towards that column. So in a way, what I'm working on here is a graded wash that's turned sideways. Again, I've got some olive green mixed with some of that raw sienna, and I'm letting it blend where it wants to with that column of light. And when we get down to our bottom third, where we're going to be developing our stream, I want that edge to be soft and not unlike this color right here. A nice light green I'll create with some olive green and some raw sienna. I'll just go ahead and put a few wedges of that coming in because we know that we're going to want our stream to meander a little bit, and I don't want to have banks or boundaries that are too exact. I'll be carving that water out of our pigment at some point. I know that. Intended for this to get over here a little farther. Okay, everything is still soft, but while it is soft, I'm going to start getting some darker greens to go in above it. I'm going to use sap green, I'm using Prussian blue, I'm using sepia. And Prussian blue and sepia, in other words, a blue and a brown, actually do create a really deep foresty green. Throwing that sap green in there just kind of accentuates it a little bit. This time I will leave some areas where you can still see some of that olive green color coming down through. So I'll just make some verticals with darker green, and I'm going to go back and forth, lighter green, darker green, until I get something I think is pretty interesting in terms of our forest here. Okay, better touch back into that yellow a little bit. I want to load my brush with it. This will probably lighten this area up a little, but I just want to keep that edge active. In other words, I want there to be loose pigment that's still moving around here and not just rigid lines that are created because I've let it dry. Okay, again, darker. An artist named Hans Hofmann used to say all the time, I'm pushing and pulling. Pushing one way with my pigment or my idea, and then I kind of realize, oh gosh, I got to adjust this other stuff. So it's a constant process of change and development. Now I'm going to start from the bottom and pull my way up, sort of leaving some areas which could become trunks possibly here and down in here. I want my light still coming from above. I'm down in here though, it's actually getting darker because it's down in more shadowy country. I just want to keep this active, and I notice this is starting to get a little dry here. I'm going to punch in some more of that yellow mixed with titanium white. Let that bleed a little bit. I'm going to throw a little bit more Prussian blue into this time and come up from this area. Don't want to just do the same thing each time because then you're not adding to the variety of your work. And if I switch something, even if it's just to put a little extra touch of one of my pigments into my mix, it'll help to give a little more variety to the overall composition when we're done. Okay, so from the bottom, I kind of just am going up. Boy, this one's got a lot more sepia in it. That's okay. Okay, I could mist this a little bit, encourage it to continue to blend with each other. As I go now, I don't want this to just be all really light and this to all be really dark. The trees themselves are casting shadows, and this is actually going to have quite a bit of darkness in the foreground as well, and it's even closer to us, so that would tend to make the values darker as well. So I'm going to, while this is still a bit wet, I'm going to bring in some darker pigment, and again, I'm going to think about wedges. I'm wedging this in a little bit. Could have some coming across here for our foreground. I'm leaving a little bit of a pathway of lighter pigment, and then there's some darker, and maybe I better get a mix that has more sepia in it for a little more variety. This has got a lot of blue in it. Bring that down. So again, I'm thinking of wedges. And down here, interesting part of the painting, I'm actually letting the water flow out of the picture frame. And so that part I want to be pretty abstract, pretty juicy, pretty loose. I'm going to put clean water down here, and I don't care now if there's back runs or some little blooms like we've noticed when we were playing around with watercolor at the very beginning. That's fine right now down here because it will look like the water is hitting the rocks and it's splashing around and it's just creating sort of a beautiful abstract mess. I also don't care if there's some pigment in some of that because the water's catching, reflecting colors that it sees around, that it's picking up from around it. And I'm using my brush rinsed in water and dried on a rag to lift some of that pigment back out. So far, I've used my 1-inch flat brush for everything in this painting. It's all soft. My paper is still damp. I can still see a shine when I look at sideways in the light. So there's still, I know that means there's still a lot of moisture in this paper, but every single stroke has been made with the same brush. I mean, I think it's a great way to start because everything is soft, juicy. There's a lot of places where pigment's flowing together in interesting ways. But now I'm going to change up a little bit and use a round brush, and I'll bring some pigment still back into these areas. It's going to be dark, so I'm using sepia, I'm using Prussian blue, and I'm going to touch in behind some of this foliage that's in the foreground. And I'm thinking of now a little bit more about how this foliage looks. So I'm looking at this line at the bottom. I'm kind of creating sort of, you can see I made sort of a bump or a bush right there and then back there. I'm mixing it up. I'm putting more, sometimes more sepia into it, sometimes more Prussian. But this is creating bushes in a way in the foreground because I'm letting the pigment blend together. I'm letting it, some of that darker pigment flow down and help me create those bushes in the foreground. That's fine. I want all this lower area to be more shadowy anyhow. So that's fine, but I'm going to not just make it into a line of color. I want it to sort of bleed and blend together. Let's put some of that darker color down in here as well. Even close to the stream, this is still so wet, it just flows all over the place, but that's okay. I'm just going to touch some dark pigment in here and let that become what will later look like sort of vegetation because as it bleeds open, see, it creates these little wisps of what might appear like leaves or grasses, alternating all the time. So I'm going light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. So I'm always switching back and forth, pushing and pulling. I want variety in my shapes. I want variety in my colors. I want variety in my values. So that tells me to always keep changing it up. If I seem like I'm making kind of a straight line, I'll try to mix it by, this time I'll grab a little bit more Prussian to mix in, and I'll throw in a darker spot in here. And that blue in this foreground part will pick up some of that Prussian blue up in my forest. Now I like this variety better because I have wide and thin, wide and thin. That's an important part of my variety as well, is my shape sizes. I think I'm going to throw a little bit of sap green in, a little darker amount of sap green into my mix for some of this down here. This will definitely look like a shrub then probably. And I'm bringing some of that pigment in towards the river, but not so that it really tells you a whole lot about the river yet. We're going to have to carve out that river out of this pigment later. Look at the shapes I'm using. A lot of triangles, a lot of wedges. Not just because I think I love triangles, but because it helps in the design. It tends to help people's eye kind of move naturally back into this background. Pretty much every place I'm doing this, I'm making a triangle somehow. Okay, well, we've got some interesting things going on. If I want to even add more variety and interest, I think it's time to take a paper towel. I've got a lot of pigment in some of these areas that I could punch out with a paper towel. What that really does is creates a texture later. So If I do that with a paper towel right now and mist it, those areas that got dried out will fill in with pigment that it grabs from neighboring areas, and it will help the whole overall painting have kind of an intriguing texture. Other people are going to look at your painting after this and say, whoa, how did they do that? That looks awesome, because it's not something that you can see the person's hand or their brush stroke. It's as if you've allowed nature to do the work, and that's one of my goals in my painting. I think I'm just going to put in a little bit of color down here. I'll carve some of that out later probably. Let's see, we need to keep going with our Prussian and sepia, which is our darkest mix. And I think I'm going to just put some of that in here. Not going to make the shape be too predictable. I don't want to just be boringly the same with every single shape I put in. Rather, try to have a nice bit of variety. My paper is very slowly drying out. And as it does, if I keep putting pigment in, it's going to create varying amounts of run, varying amounts where the pigment flows and looks sort of like vegetation. So again, I'm trying to think of variety, and I'm making areas of light kind of punctuated by areas of dark, areas with that Prussian blue mixed with areas that are lean more towards the sepia. And these areas down here are going to let people know that there's stuff going on around there. There's some kind of vegetation or something, but we can't really tell you right now. And that suggestion is why your viewer is going to be intrigued by your painting, because you've given them some work to do too. They have to use their imagination to really catch on to what's going on in this painting. Whenever I see a place where it seems like I've just made too much of a sort of a layered look, I try to break it up, like have this go farther up into that other light area. So the thing that's going on in my mind all the time is break it up, add variety, add texture. If I put one big thick thing in there, put a thin thing next to it. I'm using the tip of this round to even suggest a little bit of shrubbery there. I'm going to switch over to my rigger because I know that changing my brush also helps to add to the variety. This is going to put some thinner marks into this forest above us. And I will start a little bit low risk, let's put it that way, by starting away from this column of light. This is going to really show what I do very clearly. So in other words, if I mess up, it's going to be obvious. But if I start out here where everything is darker and it's more similar, it's going to be more forgiving. So if I pull a vertical or slightly slanted trunk or branch of some sort coming down through this, it'll help add a little bit of variety into those marks. And let's see, I think I'm getting close to where we need to let this dry before we do a whole lot more, because we don't want it to run all over the place now. We want to have a little bit more control. I think I'm going to add some dark down here at the bottom of my forest where the stream kind of goes off into the mysterious depths. That can be fairly dark down in this area, and we'll have some trunks that come down into it. So I'm going to mist this thing, put a little texture in here, and then let this dry. And then let's come back and fix that forest up. Okay, I've dried this painting a bit, but I can tell it still has moisture in the paper. I can still see some waves in the paper. I tend to take the back of my hand and touch that to the paper. If it feels still a little cool, you can tell that there's still moisture coming up through there. There's a little piece of bristle from my brush that got right there. I'm not too worried about that coming out later. I guess we'll just let that be what it is. I don't want to scar this right now. It's still wet and it will scar if I do too much messing around. But I wanted to have it dry enough so that we can start manipulating our painting in ways that we want to. Maybe one of the first things is to see if we can clean up this stream a little bit. And what I'm going to do is a motion that's lifting paint with my 1/2-inch flat brush. I'm going to move to the from one side to the other, and I'm going to lift paint out into this pigment, out into the undergrowth of my forest. Let's start with the very far back. That edge I want to be pretty straight. That place is where the water is up against the bushes and the undergrowth way back there. If I go over to this side here, to the right side, that river kind of disappears behind. If you can see what I'm trying to do, the river is going to sort of disappear behind this foliage right here, whatever these bushes and trees and stuff are. The river is going to go out of our sight. But I need to clean this up with clean water and a 1/2-inch flat, back to back and forth, and then I just push it off over that direction to the right. And let's get a clean paper towel instead of making a mess with a dirty paper towel. And if I push down with my fingers, I'm going to lift a little bit of paint out of that area and help define that part of the stream. Now I'm going to do the same as I work my way downriver sort of here towards my viewer. I'm going to just soften the edge of the stream by lifting a little bit of paint off to the side. Okay, I'm going to continue to do that all the way down. If you think about the shape that's going to be sticking out into the river, it's going to be flat on the bottom of the shape because it's against the water. It's the water line, and gravity makes water create a straight line there. But the top is a hump. It's some kind of rocks or vegetation that's going up. And so the bottom edge is flat, but the top edge is going to have some dimension to it, be sort of rounded. So if I go in like so, make a little bit of an indent right there, the water flows off into the edges where it seeks lower ground. It's going to create a little eddy right there probably. Maybe a good fishing spot. And I'm going to come down through this pigment, keep on moving my way down the stream. Straight line against the bottom, and let it curve to whatever it's doing at the top. Let's lift some of that pigment out with my paper towel. Well, it was totally accidental, but I've created kind of a tight spot here for my stream, and that could be a place where the water actually goes over a slight little riffle or a waterfall, a small waterfall. So I'm changing my direction of my flat. Instead of going horizontally into it, I'm going to go ahead and let there be a little bit of a waterfall here, some trickles, so they'd be more going down at several different angles. And at the bottom, it would be white water. There could be mist or spray. So again, I want to let the water do the work. So I'm just going to touch this with clean water and let it kind of do what it's going to do, which is going to partly be to make sort of a misty area, look like sort of a misty area here where this stream is kind of going over some tight spots, some rocks. Okay, but now I'm back down here. I can go back to my horizontal, create a straight edge where the water line is, and twist and turn this stream. Let's put a little edge on this one. That's okay that this is darker. I like that. It's sort of, who knows what that is, just shadows in the water or maybe a muddier spot. Finally, I want to make sure that there is a part of this stream that lets people know that there's some white water coming down here. So I'm going to take my big flat 1-inch brush with clean water on it and lift some of this out so that we have some white all the way down. Help tie together this stream all the way up. We'll see. We might need to fill some of that in later, but for right now, I'm just going to lift that out. Now that it's starting to dry more, if I decide to put something in this foreground, like for example, some foliage, it's going to stay more where I put it. So rather than having the water kind of bloom and have the pigment kind of create a bush that way, I'm going to go ahead and use my rigger and put some stems into that growth. So I'll just put a few little suggestions of grasses or shrubbery that's close to the edge of my stream here, and that's going to be working its way up a little bit. And then maybe over here as well. I'm using some Prussian, some sepia, and I'm using my rigger and using variety of the ways that I stroke it. I'm going not just at one angle, but I'm sort of going at a bunch of angles. The one thing I will say is I kind of think of these as guides to my viewer's eye. So they're kind of like hands or whatever that are reaching, saying, hey, welcome, follow the yellow brick road here. You know, it's bringing people in. So that's why I tend to aim towards my sweet spot. Okay, well, that's my very close foreground. I'm going to mist that a little bit so they're not too perfect. And I'm going to maybe toothbrush a little bit down in these corners just so that I have a little more variety. And it gives people the suggestion of rocky forest floor right here. I don't want this to look too painstakingly painted. Now let's think about our trees. I actually want to have a value change in this forest. Again, remember our sketch. Whoa. My sketch landed on some water, so it did some interesting things with the marker. But I've got dark value down here, and I want to have dark values kind of frame this column of light. But I do want some interest in that column of light. I want to have some way that you can tell that there's trees all the way through here, but that the sun is shining down through, or the evening light maybe. So I am going to use a lighter value. I'm using the same mixture. It's sepia, Prussian blue, maybe a little bit of sap green, but it's got more water in it compared to how much pigment it has. So that means if I can just test it right here where it's going to get covered up later probably. I can now make a line using my rigger. I could put a trunk right down through my column of light. I could put some branches off of it. Again, it's just a very light mix of that Prussian blue and sap green and sepia, but that's giving me a chance to put some light shapes of trees in here. It's just a suggestion that there's trees all the way back into this mysterious forest that we're entering. So again, I'll try to have a nice vertical with some branching. This is just totally based on kind of my own whims right now. I'm not putting branches covered with needles. It appears that they're more empty, but that's okay because I'm just kind of trying to use the architecture of the tree to define this column area of light. And the crucial piece of this is how much pigment do I have in my brush? And it's not that much. It's a lot of water. Okay, let's just look at this for a second. I took a few minutes to let this dry a little bit more and to stand back and take a look at it. It's really important while you're painting, take another look from a distance. But now I'm just going to be in a process of adding darker values into this forest. And I'm using the triple threat of sap green, Prussian blue, and sepia. Some of these trees are going to have thicker trunks. Some are going to be thinner. In this area, I want some fairly dark values. I'm going to use my round brush. I'm not worried too much about having imperfections on my trunk as I come down because trees tend to also have imperfections. Now look what happens down at the bottom. When it touches this lighter color where that yellow is, I am going to spot that in with sort of dots of this darker pigment. That's where some of the foliage in the foreground actually covers up this dark tree that's coming out of the forest. I'll put a few branches on there, but we're going to think about more than branches in a minute here. I want variety, so I'm going to have an area where I go ahead and really hit that Prussian blue. Let's put another distant trunk in here with maybe this time we'll get some pine needles on it. Maybe it goes past that tree. Okay, I'm working my way downward. I'm using a pointed round brush with quite a bit of Prussian blue in my mix here. And I'm going side to side, letting these branches just kind of give me the design. I'm making a suggestion to my viewer. I'm not trying to paint a perfect forest. I'm suggesting it by the kind of shapes, the poetry of the shape that I'm putting down. Let's put it that way. Over here, I'm just going to let this be darker. I'm putting some darker pigment, a little more Prussian in it, and have that kind of bleed down here because I realize I really need a overall darker forest with some variety. So a few strokes of that kind of juicy Prussian combo will help that, get me that effect. And over here, we're ready for a darker trunk. A little more sepia, Prussian blue. I'm touching into some foliage down here, so I'm going to think about the shape that I'm leaving. I'm leaving a rounded area, another clump over this way, and then this big old trunk comes in somehow like this. I could throw a few branches off of it. Okay, light, maybe a little more of that olive green. And let's put some lighter trees in this region that's kind of close to that cathedral look, close to where I've got that column of yellow. But now I'm using more of that olive green in the mix, a lighter olive green with some of our yellow in it, and quite a bit of water so that it's creating, it's making a nice transition here. We want to go yellow to light stuff to dark stuff. I just kind of keep that in mind as I work my way around this forest. I'd like to think a little bit about this back area where the river disappears from sight. And I'm going to create a second layer of value by having like some rocks along the shore of that river or some shrubbery. So I want to bring super dark down to it, but I'm not going to go all the way to that white stretch. I'm actually going to stop short of that, and you can see that I'm in a way creating some shrubbery back there. I'm not talking about the dark value now, I'm talking about the light value that I've left. Down by this white water, now I've got another kind of layer of bushes. So I negatively painted that. That's where the negative painting really comes in to help give you a lot of variety in your work. Now I'm going to take that darker pigment up into the forest. I want to use a lot of water here because I don't really want that to be strong demarcation. I want it to just be a soft blending. So let's see if I can get this to look a little bit more natural by using my rigger to break up some of that super dark pigment, but extend it up into the forest. Another super dark area right here. I'm going to bring it down, 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 just so that I break up some of these areas of shrubbery or who knows what's going on. I want it to be mysterious, not weird. Okay, here we go. Let's try using our mister now. The mist bottle will help me kind of integrate all that pigment without having it look really fake. It'll look more atmospheric. I'm going to take clean water and soften this top edge of what I just put on. So that disappears into the yellow, disappears into the light, and it's nice and mysterious. It's got some intriguing shapes in it. Throw a little more darkness down in here because it will help make that more dispersed. Okay, there we go. I'm thinking about the overall shape of my column of light. I'm going to make it sort of have an angle to it right there so it's a little more interesting than just being cut off or straight. And now some of this is an exercise in obliteration. I mean, I'm softening edges. I'm taking places where I had a really identifiable trunk or something, and I've kind of made it blended into its surroundings a little bit more so it's lost in the shadows a bit. I'm going to keep letting this dry, and I'll add a little bit more detail to the forest as we go, but let's let this dry for a bit. Now that my paper is a bit drier, I feel like I have a little bit more control. I want to show you one trick for creating now this forest of atmosphere and mystery. And one trick is to start a tree partway up. Maybe I'll start a tree right here. I typically was making trunks that started all the way from top to bottom, but now I'm just going to paint a little part of it, and I'll paint some trunk right here. And I'm going to let this branch kind of cover that up and start again down below. And instead of trying to make perfect little pine needles or something, I'm going to just throw some suggestions of branches that go off of this one. Cover up this tree. This is playing around with what's in front of what. I'm not worrying about that. I'm just obscuring it so that you're going to notice suggestions of trees, but not just see some perfectly distinct tree all set out where you got all OCD about it and just try to make some perfect tree. I'm rather trying to make shapes that suggest trees. These are all fairly vague. Now that they've dried, they all didn't dry very sharp and crisp, so I can certainly use some crisp right now. And I'm going to put it in between these two, this thick one and this thin one, maybe closer to this thick one. I'm going to create a tree that will be darker and more distinct because the paper's drier. I'm using my rigger. I'm using quite a bit of pigment, and so I'm getting a more intense tree right here. I'm going to have it go up all the way. I'm putting it a bit of an angle so that it doesn't just look like my whole entire forest is somehow perfectly straight up due north every tree, baby. Okay, again, parts are darker, parts are lighter. I'm going to let this base kind of disappear into nothingness by touching it with my rag. I'll throw some branches in. Using my rigger, I'm just flicking like we practiced on our trees off to the sides. And this one is coming down in front of all the stuff we have behind it, just because by the darkness, you can tell that. The pigment I'm using, the placement of it, and the overall value is much darker. I'm mixing thin branches with thicker ones where I splatter a little bit more pine needles or whatever you want to think of them as, creating that rhythm sort of lighter, medium, darker. I'm giving it a little drama that way. Okay, I don't want this side to go without my attention, so I'm going to put a tree. I think I'm going to overlap this trunk right here so that another tree comes. Let's see. It actually comes out over that way. I wanted something that helps kind of create this pattern of all these trees are kind of paying attention to this column of light. One thing we talked about in making trees was using a sponge, and I could give that a try right now. I've got a triangle of just a simple kitchen sponge cut up into a little triangle. I'm rubbing it into my puddle of sepia, Prussian, and sap green, and now I can use that. What it'll do is just give a different texture that we're not used to yet. It's a little bit finer. I'm going to bring some of those closer over towards our column of light. In a way, it helps me sort of blur the edges a little bit more, sort of provides an interesting texture, and it helps. I have quite a bit of control over those little spots of pigment, so I can make a softer transition between deep, dark forest and that column of light. Down here, especially in this stuff that's mysterious growth, we don't know what it is. There's little tiny trees getting started. There's shrubbery. I'm trying to think of it not so much as that I'm trying to replicate nature, but rather I'm creating a design, and I've got some soft transitions between light stuff and dark stuff. And I'm using that trick of light to draw you into my painting, all a process of manipulation. Okay, now don't forget that you've done something that's very brutal in terms of you've really put yourself into what you just did. And I'm going to add some more chance by putting some mist on it. I want those little spots where I decided to put pine needles to disperse a little bit, to soften a little bit, to blend together a little bit. So that's it for the sponge, I think. And I'm going to get some more blue into this upper area. I think the blue really helps this painting to sort of read with all the mystery of the forest. Maybe even just put a nice Prussian trunk coming down there or here. One trick is to go back now and find one of your trees and just only put intermittently color in the trunk and let some other stuff, branches or something else, predominate or be revealed by the way you've touched into that trunk. Let's see. So for an example, I might darken this, gives it a nice vertical coming up through here, but then I'm not afraid to just let it trickle out, just kind of fade out. It's probably time to stand back from your painting and just take a look at it and see what parts kind of stick out to you. And I'm going to just use that time to kind of fill in some branches or keep that patterning going where I'm creating the misty forest. Okay, again, it's about the values that are going to be bringing people in. So I want there to be this band of light coming down, and that's going to illuminate this area of the forest. It's why we can see this stream right here. I can add a little bit of dark. I realized I can use my sponge and put a little bit of darkness down here at the base. This way, those strokes that I made with my rigger are coming out of some kind of darker stuff down here just to help create sort of this illusion of creating a stage. Our painting is on display. Again, I better soften that, obscure it a little bit with some spray. I'll just mist it. And now let's take a look at our stream a little bit more again. One of the things people say about watercolor is that it's difficult because you have to think about doing the light stuff first, and then the only thing you can do is make it darker. Not always true, but I think in this case, I'm mostly going to change this foreground by adding darks to it, not by trying to bring in any pigment again that's light. Experiment with it. You're going to play around with this and see what you come up with. But I'm using my darkest mix, which is the Prussian blue and sepia, and I'm going to use it on my fan brush to just start to identify a little bit of the vegetation that's down here, give it a little bit more drama with darker pieces coming out and darker scrub brush underneath. So again, I'm just pulling it upwards like grass using my fan brush, trying to avoid making perfect straight lines or having all the lines going one direction. I'm putting these in ways that kind of accentuate those little wedges that we've made that are very soft now because I did that while the paper was wet. And again, I'm going to just bring some of these grasses across all the way to the river where they kind of fade out. I deliberately kind of kept the bottom of my strokes a little bit round there, almost to suggest like there's a rock there. And then I'll go over in front of it and leave that rock kind of light colored, color in some of that foliage that's darker in front of it. A little of this kind of stuff goes a long way. Once you get going on it, you tend to kind of think, oh man, I love that. I'm going to just keep going forever. That's part of our human nature when we realize that there's a little repetitive motion we kind of like. We just keep going like, I'm going to paint every brick in that wall. Yay. And it ends up making your painting a lot more contrived and boring. So I'm just going to suggest spots rather than try to do a ton of them. And I think if I hit a suggestion right there, for example, that'll do me quite a bit to bring that whole area into this painting. Okay, now I need to think about this water a little bit more. And that is, remember that we talked about there was a constriction here sort of naturally created by the way the paint flowed in. I'm going to make rocks in the stream, I guess. And I'll do that by thinking of the shape that that rock creates. And it looks to me like the water is spilling right here. And I've created one little triangle. You can see there's a little triangle right here, which could be a rock that's being washed over with water. And instead of coloring that whole triangle darker, I'm going to color the bottom part of it darker. And that is a rock that's covered up with water. And down below it, it's getting splashed. There's some white water down below, maybe a little dot of rock there and a little dot of rock over here. And we'll just see if we can make that look like the water's really going over there. I'm going to use some of my Prussian blue that had a little bit of, gosh, it has a little bit of sepia in it that's giving me kind of a gray color, grayish blue. And I'm going to use that to create a little bit of water suggestion here. Okay, this stuff, let's see what's happening. The water's coming down. It's white. It's a process. It's experimental. I'm going to make the white stuff be below these rocks, and I've got to suck up some of it with my brush right now. So that got a little out of control. Need a clean paper towel, hit where those rocks are. And now let's see if we can clean this stuff up. We still need whiteness. My mistake that I made was I started touching into that while that rock was still super wet, and it just started bleeding all over. So live and learn. That's fine. If I use clean water to clean it up when I'm done, nobody will know the difference. Okay, I'm putting a few little bits of that grayish color back. I notice what I'm doing. I'm starting out in the landscape and moving in towards the water. I'm basically trying to cover up some of this, the white, and I'm going to put a few spots where I put some motion this way. So I'm putting a few little spots where the water is maybe flowing like this. I'll do it down here where it's a little bigger. So in other words, I'm kind of helping my viewer see, oh, the water's kind of flowing there. Okay, grayish blue. Now it's going to be flowing over this direction. And I'm kind of graying out this side area here. I want to leave this white stuff where the mist is coming off the water. Leave that more misty. Okay, just a suggestion is all you need. Start thinking that you have to paint every little wave of water. It's going to look pretty fake. Okay, so again, I want to kind of gray out this part so it draws your eye over to that place where the white water has been created. Okay, how does this very far back part look? It looks a little bit fake. I think if I blew out this side over here and just let there be a little touch of whiteness. Okay, I'm about ready to say that's good enough, but let's take a look. This is a good time to let it dry. Sit down in a nice comfortable chair and prop it up in front of you and take a look and see how it feels to you. Is there something that sticks out as being kind of awkward? And if you can add some variety, that sounds great. I followed my own advice and sat down and took a look at this painting from a distance. It's important when you've been sort of had your whole focus in your brain and all that intensity just zeroing down on that paper that you give yourself a break and loosen up and take a look at it from a different perspective. What I remembered while I was sitting there looking at it is that I feel it's a little bit flat. It's got a touch of boredom to it in a way. There's enough variety probably of value, but the color of that column of light, I feel like could be enhanced if we remember our color wheel and we remember that the color opposite yellow is actually purple and that's its complement. And so I'm going to take a little light wash of, I use Da Vinci Violet, but whatever you've got that's in that purple range. And I'm going to wash a little bit of purple into my painting. I'm going to start over on this edge, clear out on the outskirts of our mysterious forest. And let's see, over this side, I want you to not feel like this is too precious, like my forest. Oh, I worked so hard on my forest. So I just am washing over this, and I'm letting that purple tell a little bit different story. Down here, I kind of make a cup of that purple so that it's going to blend into the bottom part of my column of light. And that is where a little bit of vibration is going to happen because of what a complementary color means and does. It really sets off that other color. It sets off, in this case, the yellow. But we got to be pretty careful. I want to keep it subtle. I don't want to do any weird stuff. I'm going to let this dry. Let's see, that's a little bit rugged there. And put a few mysterious mottled bits in with my paper towel and my mist bottle. And if I let this dry and then touch some darks into it, I think it'll help this baby really sing a little bit. And maybe even a little bit of purple down in this foreground. See, I've got the strongest purple right down in there, so I'm going to just touch this area. And I'm using a big brush so I don't get too fussy and start thinking, oh, I got to be really careful. So a little bit of that violet down there. And mist it. Let that blend in so it doesn't look like it's so carefully done. And any place I see a hard edge, I'm going to kind of obscure it. And maybe even down at this very bottom of my river. Okay, I'm going to let this dry and then see if it would be enhanced with a few darker darks. Let's take a look at that. I'm adding a little bit more sponge. I'm adding a little bit more mist. And I'm going to just lift a little bit out up here from this upper corner. I want the light to be a little bit more cathedral-like up here. It was just bugging me, this upper part. So I'm going to just use my flat 1-inch brush and draw through that. This part is a little bit confusing, but I think if I paper towel this and mist it, I'm just going to let the geometry of my shapes do the work here, hopefully. I feel like I need to lighten this area out a little bit as it gets closer to the cathedral. And I'm obliterating, lifting and spraying and lifting again. And there's a little bit of rhythm there. Now, one trick I use to kind of create this zigzag that I've got a river coming back, I've got dark shapes that are kind of angling in, is that I'm going to just lead your eye a little bit up this river. And I notice that this side's a little bit more weighted, but over here, if I just put a couple of light grass-like lift outs, this is using clean water with my 1/2-inch flat, I just lift out a few little blades of this grass. I've already got some dark suggestions of that grass, but if I lift it out with my thin flat brush, it's going to help people's eye be led into this painting a little bit more even. I tend to do it by 3s, so I'll just do a 3rd little tiny one right there. And that just helps kind of bring this pattern that we're looking for. And this is now a little bit more what I wanted. That mystery kind of is a little more clear. I don't have every tree branch really understandable. It's kind of a hodgepodge. Put a little bit of light coming in here too. It's push and pull. Remember, I thought I was doing such a great thing to add that Prussian there. Now I need to kind of make sure it works and didn't mess up the whole painting, you know. It's a push and pull situation at all times. Clean water usually can help. I just touch it in. Could even throw a little bit of that mix of medium yellow and titanium into this. Just let it touch, let it mist, spray it. And up from the bottom, light coming through. Let's see how we do. We've got zigzags. We've got things pointing this way. I can see it carried away through this diagonal and then on up into our canopy up here. Again, I'm not afraid to just go back, touch this a little bit with clean water. Let that clean water sit there for just a second. Touch it with a paper towel and mist it. Let's let it dry, call it good. I hope this lesson helped you see some of the possibilities in turning your format vertically, and how glazing and lifting can help you make a very atmospheric painting by making your lights lighter and your darks more mysterious. I love William Butler Yeats's poem called Lake Isle of Innisfree. I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honeybee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always, night and day, I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. While I stand on the roadway, or on the pavement's gray, I hear it in the deep heart's core. Hi, I'm Bob. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you'll go by my website at watercolorwithbob.com. That's where you'll find an interactive outline of the whole course. You can also share your work with me and your fellow students. One thing I really love about watercolor is how accessible it is. That's why I realized it was important to me to put this course out for free. That said, it would mean the world to me if you would support this work. You can like it, you could share it with your friends, you could subscribe to the channel, you could also visit the gift shop or even make a donation. Thanks so much. See you on the next lesson, and happy painting. Please don't curse. Take a step back from your painting and just let your spirit relax.